Mesdames et messieurs, bonjour à nouveau. Welcome again. I'm the head of the Polish section at INALCO, the National Institute dedicated to Oriental languages and civilization, and I'm having the pleasure and the honor to moderate this encounter debate. We'll be focusing on a non-typical book, Europe's post-war periods, writing history backwards, 1918, 1945, and 1989. Two of the authors, the contributors, are here with us. We are very glad to have them with us today. Thanks for coming and for having accepted this invitation to make a presentation of the book, and also to have accepted the challenge of this debate which is going to come. John Horne, maybe in French now, vous êtes professeur émérite au Trinity College de Dublin, et vous êtes membre de l'Académie irlandaise, la Royale. Et nous vous connaissons en France pour avoir, dans la mesure où vous avez été récemment le président du comité scientifique de l'exposition à l'Est, la guerre sans fin, qui a été présentée avec beaucoup de succès l'année dernière au musée de la guerre aux Invalides. Péter, Apor, vous êtes chercheur au centre de recherche dédié aux humanités, Research Center for the Humanities, auprès de l'Académie hongroise des sciences. Et comme je l'annonçais, nous allons nous concentrer sur ce livre qui, j'en dis quelques mots avant de donner la parole à nos intervenants. Nous avons conçu cette rencontre sous la forme d'une brève double présentation et ensuite peut-être donc, je l'espère, cette discussion portant sur les jalons essentiels du livre. En le lisant, pour ma part, j'ai été frappé par le soin apporté à la réflexion portant sur la méthode. Comme si donc l'élaboration ici d'un protocole permettait d'envisager l'histoire du XXe siècle autrement. Et non seulement l'histoire, mais aussi la manière de la concevoir et de l'écrire. Et nous obtenons ainsi une histoire qui n'est pas linéaire, qui n'est pas chronologique, qui n'est pas téléologique non plus, qui n'est pas non plus homogène et qui n'est pas non plus nationale, mais transnationale et transversale. Donc cette méthode que vous avez appliquée contient en elle-même une réflexion sur la manière d'écrire l'histoire, ce qui est important. Et vous avez fait le choix donc d'une histoire collective, transversale, transnationale, qui prend appui sur des jalons, comme je le disais, permettant de mettre en rapport, de comparer des choses qui autrement n'auraient sans doute pas été mises en rapport de la même manière. In order to provide a powerful lens through which to look at, dites-vous, donc la métaphore des lentilles qui permettent de voir mieux, et ainsi nous réécrivons l'histoire à partir de ces jalons en adoptant une méthode régressive. Alors ça, c'est assez intéressant, on inverse le courant, puisque 1989, ici, n'est pas perçu comme un point d'aboutissement, mais au contraire comme un point de départ. Donc nous remontons à partir de 1989 le cours de l'histoire et en nous concentrant en particulier sur donc 1945 et 1918, autrement dit non pas sur les guerres elles-mêmes, mais sur ce qui s'appelle donc la période de l'après-guerre ou alors la sortie de guerre, comme on le dit aussi. Et cette méthode donc permet de réagencer, de restructurer la compréhension de l'histoire du XXe siècle. Voilà, alors je n'en dis pas plus, donc cette présentation de ma part est aussi en même temps une question, puisque je vous invite à parler de cette méthodologie, à nous faire partager cette expérience. John Horne, peut-être d'abord.
Merci, Piotr, d'abord pour présider donc cette séance et aussi d'avoir si bien compris le livre. Donc d'emblée, ça me rassure. Hein, voilà. Donc je vais continuer en anglais, mais I'm going to continue in English, but thanking the organizers very much for kindly allowing us to present a book which they believed, and I hope it's the case, is relevant to the conference theme. So what is the book, beyond what Piotr has already summarized about it? Europe's post-war periods, 1989, 45, 18, Writing History Backwards, written by a collective of us historians, 11 in fact, all members of Eurohist 20, which is a small research consortium of institutions and universities across the continent, and we've been working for 15 years now. We started, in fact, in Central European University. We've produced a previous book on conflicted identities in Europe, and this continues the process. The editors are Martin Conway, Peter Lagrue, and Henri Rousseau. As I stressed, it was a collaborative, ongoing research project and book, and the good news is that I have leaflets here with a 35% discount. So if anybody is sufficiently interested after the debate to want to buy the book, then please see me and I will give you them. So as Piotr has said quite accurately, the book tries to do two things. It argues that more important even than the three continental wars that marked European history from 1914 to 1989 were the three post-war periods that came after them and determined what the legacy of those wars would be for the continent. So 1919, 1945, and 1918 were, on this view, more than the turning points, which is how we've referred to them so far in this conference, more than thresholds. The argument is that those three dates opened up post-war periods, and those post-war periods had their own features, their own cogency, and their own contradictions. However, and as you rightly point out, this is the second originality and the real methodological originality of the book. We wanted to do more than compare the three post-war periods. We wanted to explore how they related to each other. And we also wanted to avoid teleology, simple chains of cause and effect across the century. So we adopted what I call, and I've used this method quite a lot in my own teaching, we adopted the regressive method, which meant starting with the most recent period, after 1989, and working back to the previous two, literally writing history backwards. And this was more than mental gymnastics, though it certainly involved these. The aim was to see what of the earlier periods was in the later periods and what wasn't. Broken continuities perhaps best sums up the outcome. Now, each author or pair of authors took a particular field: borders, justice, futures, pasts, markets, empires, so that we could relate the three post-war periods to each other in a comparative and thematic way. And for my part, I discussed demobilization as a cultural and a political, as well as a military and economic process. We wanted, therefore, as you can see, to pursue a diachronic reflection that might throw up new connections and new contrasts by focusing on these specific periods. But of course, and I have to enter the caveats, nothing explains everything. And we were certainly not, I think, trying to explain everything in this book. We were well aware that post-war periods were certainly important in terms of markets, state intervention, warfare to welfare, and also in terms of political democracies, the reconfiguring of politics through successive and often opposed versions of the demos of popular legitimization following the shattering impact of the First World War. Yet, economic transformations, political mobilizations on the European continent have long, complex histories, as do state systems, and these self-evidently involve much more than the wars. Also, the continent as a space wasn't equally affected by the three post-war periods, as the example of Spain demonstrates. So while we tried to be honest about their analytical limitations, we nonetheless felt that these post-war periods were sufficiently significant in the domains that we did tackle to warrant the effort. And I think the test of the book, and I will be really interested, Piotr, to hear what you have to say about this, I think the test of the book is whether these periods are as coherent as we suggested, hypothesized when we began. In my view, the book confirms that they are, but I'm biased, and readers will, of course, make up their own minds. Now, very briefly, to explain my view that I think the hypothesis that these post-war periods do work as a cogent historical concept, let me just briefly turn to my own chapter on demobilizations, because this, I think, highlights the case that the post-war periods were distinct. It also highlights the importance of the regressive method, because the book pivots on the argument that the Cold War was a real war, albeit a very peculiar one. And if it was a real war, there must have been a demobilization process in some manner comparable to those that happened after 1945 and after 1918. Without war, no demobilization. Without demobilization, no post-war period. The Cold War didn't produce mass death and physical destruction, at least at its epicenters in Europe and East Asia, but it did involve major mobilization of military and economic resources. And the end of the war in 1989-90 led to the withdrawal, of course, of Soviet troops from Eastern Europe and a sharp decline in the NATO presence in Western Europe, while, on my calculations, defense costs as a percentage of GDP fell sharply compared to the Cold War peak, by over a third for NATO in Europe, under a half for the USA, and well over a half for Russia. The 1990s were a period, or was a period, of the peace dividend. However, mobilization for the Cold War, like for the earlier world wars, was a cultural and a political process. And I think this was even more the case for the Cold War, since being cold, its proxy weapons were ideologies, were political systems and culture, values. On this argument, demobilization must also have been political and cultural, and these processes must in turn have been central in shaping the post-war period after 1989. Now, I can't go into the detail, but suffice it to say that I argue in the chapter that this was the case. As with the two previous post-war periods, demobilization occurred on the basis of what I would call the hard realities of peace. That is, and we've referred to it already in the conference, the new configuration of military, political, and economic forces in which the war resulted. The Western Allies won the Cold War. Russia lost, rather like Germany after 1918, with the secession of territory and peoples and the overturning of the prior political and, in this case, economic system. The states of Eastern Europe were either defeated, as far as their regimes were concerned, or liberated, as in Europe in 1945, but from a communist experience that had lasted half a lifetime and left a host of ambiguities. So what did the processes of cultural and political demobilization consist of in this context? Well, I think we can trace them at both a continental level and that of particular societies. For Europe as a whole, the ideological polarization of the Cold War, the construction by each camp of an idealized self and a demonized enemy, imperialist capitalism or communism, according to the case, had amounted to a political force field which shaped the politics, economics, and security of a divided continent. So the demise of the Soviet Union switched off that force field, and both parts of the continent demobilized their respective Cold War cultures and politics. A new field defined by the neoliberal economics, liberal democracy, and human rights, and embodied in the Maastricht criteria, incorporated much, though not all, of Eastern Europe. So this eastward expansion of the EU and NATO resolved the antagonism, the Cold War antagonism of NATO and the Warsaw Pact bloc. And it also, of course, permitted the dismantling of the figure of the enemy. Now, while this new dispensation most obviously and dramatically affected the former Soviet-dominated states in Eastern Europe, it also, though less visibly, reshaped Western European politics. And this was particularly obvious with the demise of communism as a major political force in several Western countries, but also the disorientation, though not the disappearance, of Marxism as an economic critique. And I think that is, Professor Masaryk, one of the points about Marxism in the West, that it wasn't solely associated with communism, and which explains this kind of afterlife and more than afterlife of the phenomenon. If the European project broadly shaped the visions of the future that replaced ideological perspectives of the Cold War, coming to terms with the past was equally central. And here, what I think we all in our project found interesting was how the curtailed nature of the previous post-war period at a European level, 1945 to 1949, when the settling of accounts after the Second World War had been ended prematurely and reinvested in the cultural and political mobilization for the Cold War, now resurfaced in a major reorientation of the past. And we've just, I think, been talking about this in the last session. But that's to say, in Eastern Europe, dealing with communism after 1989 inevitably meant recovering memories of non-communist impulses, anti-fascist, nationalist, in the post-1945 period and during communism. And this was paralleled in Western Europe by what Vittorio Foa memorably called the silence of the communists, the reluctance to dismantle the mythic histories of the Second World War and to interrogate the past relationship with the Soviet project on the left. Moreover, with the end of the binary politics of the Cold War, a politics, of course, by which each camp had relativized its victory over fascism in 1945 by reference to the new Cold War enemy, we should remember that for Ronald Reagan, the USSR, not Nazi Germany, was the evil empire. The Holocaust now emerged as the defining episode of the Second World War, and Auschwitz as perhaps the first contemporary European site of memory. But also, there was the emergence of all of these other memories of those past conflicts of the Second World War period and immediate Second World War period, which now, whether they'd been frozen traumas or frozen public memories or simply frozen public discourses, now, of course, emerged. It was almost as if there was a double demobilization in these past and memorial terms. So demobilization in these political and cultural senses, as well as in the military and economic ones, shaped this third post-war period. It ended, it seems to me, in Russia with Vladimir Putin's presidency from 2000 and the emergence of a revanchist nationalism deeply hostile to the European project. The newly recentered Europe of the EU took a body blow in the 1990s with the wars in the former Yugoslavia. Again, we've just heard about them. The former Yugoslavia, that third Europe, which had lain in part beyond the polarity of the Cold War, but which now engaged in a lethal ethno-nationalist conflict that reawakened the demons of the mid-century and also revealed the military weaknesses of the European Union. The limits of the European Union in providing a unifying cause and even an identity to the continent also became clear, not only, I think, with the emergence of these demands for recognition of recovered sovereignty in Eastern Europe, but also the defeat of the project for a European constitution, which of course came at the hands of Dutch and French voters in 2005, before the banking crisis of 2008 fanned populist nationalism. I would argue that by 2008, that third post-war period was over. A couple of concluding points. As I hope I've shown, the previous such period, after 1945, proved pivotal after 1989, especially but not only in Eastern Europe. As I say, in effect, not one but two demobilizations took place, as the unfinished business of the demobilization of 1945 emerged after 1989 through the consequences of communism. But there were other elements of the previous post-war periods that also surfaced explicitly or implicitly, indirectly. Let me just give one example. Crucial to cultural and political demobilization after 1989 was the reconciliation of the former enemies. And not everybody took part in this, but enough did to make it a widespread phenomenon, in a kind of popular pacifism in which the real enemy now was war itself. And that was a shaping impact in the interwar period. This popular pacifism, this revulsion against the potentialities and the record of mass industrial warfare, assumed a rather more politicized form on both sides in the Cold War, with the anti-nuclear ban-the-bomb movements. But after 1989, the war that shocked was the one against civilians in Bosnia. Genocide now became the key reference point, not mutually assured destruction or nuclear annihilation. It was as if the nuclear wasteland of mutually assured destruction on which the Cold War had been built and which inherited the destruction of the two world wars had suddenly vanished from the European perspective. And one final point, to return to Piotr's absolutely accurate observation, because the book centers on the period after 1989 and then reaches back through it to the previous post-war periods, It escapes from the temporal framework of those seminal histories which we all know, and which, rightly, understandably, importantly, have taken the violence of the Second World War as Europe's nadir, Europe's depth, and seen 1989 as the conclusion of a short 20th century. But the third post-war period points to the future as well as the past, and hopefully proposes new ways of thinking about how a longer 20th century, lasting to the early 2000s, now relates to a 21st century, which is only beginning to reveal its rather different face. Thank you.
Merci pour cette présentation qui démontre le caractère complexe de cet ouvrage, qui entremêle les fils narratifs et méthodologiques. À présent, je donne la parole à Péter Apor, peut-être en lui demandant de revenir sur cette méthodologie, mais également de nous rappeler les chapitres dont il a assuré la charge, puisque vous vous êtes occupé de deux questions corrélées qui sont d'un côté la manière qu'ont les sociétés et donc la conscience mémorielle de gérer le passé, et de l'autre côté, comment les sociétés, à partir de ces expériences de guerre, ont élaboré le futur, ont eu de planifier le futur. Et à ce propos, j'aurai tout à l'heure une question très précise à vous poser.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. Actually, as I was asked to cut my presentation a bit short, I'm focusing on a relatively brief outline of one chapter I have authored, and that's called Futures, which seems to be a rather proper choice for two reasons at least. One is that it seems rather pertinent to consider the futures of Europe in the context of very recent political and cultural transformations that Europe seems to go through nowadays. On the other hand, this chapter, Futures, rather eloquently illustrates the two major claims of the book, that, first of all, that the post-wars are or were special periods in 20th century history, different in qualities from both war times and kind of longer-term peaceful periods. And also the second claim that 1989 opens up a post-war period similar to 1945 and 1918. So basically, let me take on where John has just finished, that post-wars as a special period and 1989 as a post-war period as well. The Futures chapter, on a very, very superficial level, it basically deals with the various plans, visions and considerations on what future political, cultural and social trajectories Europe should have taken following conflicts or following wars. But on another level, these plans, visions and considerations were not simply numerous, or there were not simply plenty of them, but they actually differed very much from the classical modernist interventions into the future, which one could rather kind of summarize or just call them as planning or forecasting or calculating into the future. I mean, these sort of pre-calculating the future based on forecasting and foreseeing are very basic means of European modernity, very basic means of modern European interventions into the temporal process, which are basically based on a rather fundamental epistemological concern that time actually progresses linearly and in a very rational way to somewhere, which makes it possible to devise and design rational technological or even scientific measures by which one would be able to secure certain directions of the temporal process in the future, or one could secure the achievement of certain political, social, cultural shapes in the future. Well, as this chapter argues, the experience we find, the temporal experience in the post-war periods were actually radically different from this very basic modernist experience of time. What the chapter tries to argue is that in the post-war period, the very core experience with the temporal process was a fundamental uncertainty, which means not only that populations or many were simply uncertain that what directions the future would go in Europe, but it also implied an uncertainty which comprised a pool of equally possible scenarios of the future. Just to give you a few examples, and by these examples I would make a short detour to two other chapters concerning states and democracies, which actually, as the book argues, 20th century history, 20th century European history is very much state-centered on the one hand and political regime-centered on the other hand. And actually considerations on states and political regimes mean the core means of thinking about the future and designing plans of the future and making measures to intervene in the futures also in the post-war period. So just to give you a few examples what this basic uncertainty actually means. On the one hand, there were equally possible scenarios concerning the future of state systems or statehood in both proper post-war periods of 20th century European history. The First World War fundamentally shook the state system of Europe. On the one hand, empires collapsed, like the Habsburg Empire, the Russian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and many new nation-states emerged on the ruins of these empires. So there were a fundamental conviction that the nation-states would mean the future of Europe. But on the other hand, there were others who could equally believe in that empires would mean the future direction of European statehood. Because not all empires collapsed. I mean, most importantly, the colonial empires of Britain and France remained there and even grew after incorporating the former German overseas colonies. And that happened very similar after the Second World War. Basically, nation-states, most importantly East Central Europe, regained their sovereignty. But there were also other possible scenarios, most importantly the expansion of the Soviet Empire, which made it equally possible and equally believable for many that these different type of scenarios could be both realistic. My other example is what type of global or international model would shape the future of Europe. In both proper post-war periods, there were speculations of whether the United States would shape or would define the political and cultural shape of Europe. But there were also others who believed that it would be the third world, so Asia, the young emerging peoples of Asian statehoods, that would in a way define the European future in a global setting. Which means that basically fundamental components of thinking about or pre-calculating the direction of future history had been shaken in both these post-war periods. I mean statehood, political systems, basic cultural frameworks or cultural framings became rather uncertain in both these post-war periods, which made it very difficult to make calculations or to make rational forecasts about the possible direction of the temporal process, which in many ways defined the ways of interventions into these temporal processes. These were not simply kind of routine measures of planning, economic or political planning, but there were many political projects, political and economic projects, like the Marshall Plan, or many other national organizations that try to set up a certain series of political and cultural measures that would build on each other step by step and would secure the achievement of a certain desirable state of the future. So basically what I would like to point out is that these interventions try to reduce the uncertainty of the temporal process, what was the basic experience of many Europeans in these post-war periods. So they try to regain a certain rational calculability of the temporal process, which was the fundamental difference between post-war periods and, let's say, non-post-war periods. As the chapter tried to argue that in kind of normal non-post-war periods, this type of calculability of the future is or was or seems more or less certain, while the post-war period many ways suspended this temporal order of modernity. And all the political and cultural interventions try to re-normalize the flow of time in many ways. And the chapter tries to argue that 1989 was very similar to these both post-war periods in that respect, that it also similar way suspended modern temporal order, created fundamental uncertainties as the future of Europe concerned, both in terms of statehood, in terms of cultural identities, in terms of the international order, and created equally realistic scenarios for the future. And the interventions like the Maastricht Treaty that basically set up a rationally calculable plan for creating a new international order for Europe, the European Union, in a way, the economic plans or economic advice how to transform former planned common economies in East Central Europe into operating market economies, similarly contain these sort of set of step-by-step measures and also interventions recreating or creating statehood like the unification of Germany happened in a similar way. Both Chancellor Kohl and his East German colleague Hans Modrow introduced kind of political plans which listed a number of consecutive measures that should secure the achievement of a future statehood. So basically, just to conclude, this chapter warns what actually the whole book tries to make clear, that 20th century Europe is very much, the history of 20th century Europe is very much based on uncertainty, and it is not necessarily a teleological history that achieves achieves democracy, peace, or international cooperation as a natural order, but these achievements have been done by a certain jumping over various uncertainties, fallouts, and obstacles.
je voudrais remarquer effectivement qu'il s'agit d'un livre d'histoire qui porte à de nombreuses reprises sur l'avenir, le futur, ou plus exactement les futurs avérés et ceux qui restent possibles. Un autre aspect du livre est la manière dont il nous offre, alors peut-être pas une promenade, le terme est inapproprié, mais un parcours à travers l'ensemble du XXe siècle et en nous offrant la possibilité d'effectuer des sauts parfois surprenants. Donc, je vous propose le protocole suivant. J'aurai tout d'abord donc une question portant sur l'un des jalons essentiels du livre que j'évoquais tout à l'heure, et ensuite peut-être des questions qui, de mon point de vue, pourraient ressortir à une critique due à ma perspective, qui est une perspective centre-européenne et plus spécifiquement aussi polonaise. Alors, ma première question porterait sur la manière dont vous nous invitez à réfléchir à nouveau, mais en termes philosophiques peut-être aussi, sur le phénomène de la guerre, d'une part, et sur le phénomène de l'après-guerre. John Horne, je vous cite, vous écrivez ceci à propos de la guerre elle-même, et voici un exemple de ce saut effectué par-delà les décennies. The specter of mutual annihilation froze the dizzying escalation of warfare since 1914. In little more than 30 years, this had gone from infantry charges that Napoleon would have recognized to the obliteration of entire cities along with the distinction between soldiers and civilians. That is called mutual assured destruction. Donc voilà ce que la plongée au cœur du XXe siècle que votre livre nous propose. Et Péter Apor, inversement, donc par rapport à cette vision apocalyptique, vous écrivez ceci. Vous voyez, c'est-à-dire que ce sont des thèses donc, qui, d'un point de vue philosophique, semblent contradictoires. L'une est apocalyptique et l'autre, je vous laisse le soin d'en juger. Voici la citation. The years following the Second World War were the period of the rise of plastic surgery and the increasing use of medicine which were applied to influence the future of individual bodies by prolonging either its youthful outlook or healthy composition. Donc, d'un côté, nous avons le déplacement de l'infanterie jusqu'à la bombe atomique, de l'autre côté, le développement de la médecine plastique. Que pensez-vous de ces écarts et également d'un point de vue conceptuel?
Well, I think that there are two very interesting quotations put side by side, and for me, they precisely sum up. I mean, I hadn't thought of juxtaposing them in quite that way, but they precisely sum up the kind of Janus visage, the two-faced aspect of the 20th century, the question of whether we can sing songs of happiness. We're much less ready to write histories of happiness in the 20th century, or perhaps they might be histories of welfare or well-being. But there is no doubt that there's a kind of a trajectory which is about improvement, improved living conditions, which involves questions of reconciliation. And I think that these are aspects which are at the heart of the post-war periods, and yet there's this vertiginous shift that what they're also coming to terms with, and what provides whether frozen or unfrozen, the traumas, the memories which for so many Europeans persist, is the memories of something which is their opposite, which is of this extraordinary capacity for destruction, not of construction. And the two are, I mean, I think you pose them very well in the two quotations. They are, for me, at the heart of Europe's 20th century. And I think what Péter brought out very well when he was describing futures there was precisely how in the futures, in the uncertainty of coming to terms with the maelstrom, after particularly the first two wars, but there's also considerable maelstrom in 1989, then the desire to rescue control, to reimpose control, to plan, to build a future which allows for not just plastic surgery, but warfare becoming welfare, which allows for the economic miracles of the 1950s. Are they a form of forgetting the wars? Are they this separate or interrelated but parallel trajectory? The two. And so I think that the two themes you've identified, they intersect and they're there absolutely at the heart of the book.
Let me add one aspect, probably that, and I think it is also one of the crucial aspects of the book, which probably hasn't been kind of strikingly clarified, that they wanted to show also that these considerations do not only concern elites or political elites or intellectual elites, but they're all translatable to the very level of the individual. So I mean the uncertainty what the atomic bomb or nuclear catastrophe might have caused to many societies or to politicians could have been translated into individual lives and could be translated into concerns of the future of personal, corporal or mental integrity, and that's where plastic surgery and the neutral or the atomic bomb comes together, at least one aspect. So and that's also that we also consider. We also actually considered other similar aspects like the emergence of life insurance companies in these post-war periods, the emergence of various, let's say, agencies for future studies. For example, I mean, one of my favorite examples is a Swedish agency that actually offered individual consultancy for not only for companies but also for individuals to make them able to design and precast their own personal individual futures.
Alors, effectivement, merci pour ces aperçus qui démontrent peut-être qu'effectivement, sur un mode dichotomique, l'avantage conceptuel de votre ouvrage est qu'il nous permet d'envisager des aspects contradictoires mais aussi éloignés dans le temps, donc grâce à ces chocs qui interviennent au niveau de la structure du livre lui-même. Alors rapidement maintenant, j'aurais peut-être donc 3 questions sous forme de remarques critiques qui reposent également sur cette analyse de la méthodologie de l'ouvrage. En français, vous le savez, on emploie cette expression « comparaison n'est pas raison ». Alors bien évidemment ici, l'avantage du livre est qu'il permet de comparer des choses qui resteraient éloignées. Mais inversement, je me demande si à d'autres moments, les équivalences sous-entendues ne mériteraient pas d'être déconstruites. Rapidement, les deux guerres mondiales, la seconde et la première, ne sont pas équivalentes. Il est difficile de déterminer de façon univoque qui a déclenché la première, qui fut le principal coupable, pour ainsi dire. On est plutôt sensible à l'aspect réaction en chaîne, effet domino de la Première Guerre mondiale et de son déclenchement. Pour la Seconde Guerre mondiale, en revanche, c'est tout à fait autre chose, puisqu'ici, le coupable est clairement identifié, ce sont les totalitarismes, Hitler en particulier, qui s'est allié à Staline, mais aussi qui a bénéficié du laisser-faire des empires occidentaux, des puissances occidentales. Donc en 1938 déjà, on laisse faire. Et donc ici, le concept de guerre préventive, que l'on doit notamment à Józef Piłsudski, le maître de la Pologne de l'entre-deux-guerres, que, en lisant votre livre, j'ai eu le déplaisir de voir identifié en tant que l'un des dirigeants fascistes de l'entre-deux-guerres. Or, c'est, me semble-t-il, un contresens. Une historienne du musée des archives juives de Varsovie le dit clairement, Piłsudski, dans l'entre-deux-guerres, a été le garant le plus efficace contre l'antisémitisme. Il a été un anti-antisémite, ayant accordé la nationalité polonaise à 600 000 juifs ayant fui donc la Russie et qui ont rejoint la Pologne après 1918. Il y avait ce problème parce qu'ils ne pouvaient pas donner les preuves de leur appartenance nationale. Donc Piłsudski a dit on leur donne la nationalité. Donc ça c'est un exemple et par ailleurs un des plus éminents représentants de l'opposition allemande, a écrit un livre sur l'histoire polonaise de l'entre-deux-guerres. Il s'agit de Wolfgang Templin, et il dit lui-même que on ne peut pas comparer Piłsudski à Horne et aux autres dictateurs de cette époque, puisque ce qu'on appelle le coup d'État de 26 chez lui, c'est comme ça que Templin interprète une intervention militaire pour faire face aux extrêmes. Et donc ici, pourquoi je parle de Piłsudski? Parce que c'est la spécificité, disons, locale, centre-européenne, polonaise, mais aussi la guerre préventive. C'est-à-dire que ce concept n'apparaît pas dans le livre, de même qu'il y a quelque chose qui n'apparaît pas, c'est lié à la journée d'aujourd'hui, à ce que nous allons faire maintenant, puisque certains parmi vous vont aller rejoindre Maison Lafitte et Cultura. L'un des auteurs dit que la réécriture de l'histoire entachée par la propagande communiste en Europe centrale a commencé dès 1988. Donc quand je lis cette phrase, moi je suis très surpris parce que ce qui me manque ici, c'est le phénomène de l'émigration. Ce sont ces officines littéraires, en particulier celle de Jerzy Giedroyć, qui a été centre-européenne, ouvrant la porte au dialogue avec la Biélorussie, l'Ukraine, et qui reconsidérait la possibilité d'organiser la démocratie plus tard, quand le communisme serait vaincu. Et ça se passe dès 1947, puisqu'il fonde Cultura à Rome et ensuite il vient à Paris. Donc voilà les quelques exemples.
Merci pour les critiques et 3 réponses très brèves. D'abord, un des avantages d'un ouvrage vraiment collectif, c'est qu'on est individuellement responsable de tout et de rien. Donc, évidemment, on ne prend pas la responsabilité collective, nous individualiser nos responsabilités, comme il a été évoqué dans la dernière séance. So, one of the advantages of a collectively written book, 3 brief points, is that the individual authors don't have to take responsibility for everything. We're individuating responsibility. Yes, so I absolutely, I take the point about Piłsudski, and Piłsudski and his notion of the enlarged Poland based on the old Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was one which had a place in it for Jews, and that there was indeed that moment of Jewish integration into post-First World War Poland in the 1920s, which is very important. Totally accepted. But on the substantive point of the origins of the 2 world wars, that wasn't really our subject. Our subject wasn't to comparatively look at, even regressively, what caused the 2 world wars. What we were concerned with was the ways in which the consequences of the 2 world wars and the Cold War were framed in terms of a post-war period. So what matters there is not what caused the First World War, it's how it was interpreted in that first post-war period. And to give just 2 examples, one of the ways is, for the first time in history, the attempt to impose legal norms and therefore the possibility of war crimes trials for the supposed authors of the war, something which we will find again in a very different sense post-45 and a different sense again after 1989. But the question of
No, I'm sorry, but we are really over time.
Okay, that's fine.
We run out of time. I'm really sorry. If you want to continue and